from the simple to the complex. One of the remarkable things about the universe that we live in is that one can start with a fairly simple atomic element and then apply a rule and then iterate on that same rule and continually apply it over and over again. And sometimes one needs to iterate a fair bit on these rules. And when done, out of the simplicity, one gets structure. Sometimes very interesting structure, sometimes it's random structure. I'm going to explore this concept using the software Maya. And it might just blow your mind. So I'd like to start this journey through complexity with the simplest thing I could think of, which is a sphere. Let's just create an animation with a sphere, but we'll try and make it interesting. So first thing I'm going to need is my sphere. Then I need a light source. So I have a little light there. And a camera. And for the camera, I can simply animate its position in a line, and that'll be my entire animation, just moving a camera through a sphere. Now that sounds like probably the most boring animation in the world, but we can do things to make it a little bit more complex. One of the things we can do is to use ray tracing. Now ray tracing is an interesting form of simplification in itself. Let's say we're just simulating the way photons shoot out from lights. The standard way somebody would do it is to create photons and shoot them out from the light. And now we've got we'll make our sphere reflective. And in this case, I'll only make it reflective on the inside so lights can pass through from the outside, just for the sake of argument. Now, when the light hits the inside of the sphere, it reflects, and then we get bounced rays internal to the sphere. I'm just only showing light rays along a particular plane to simplify it a little bit here. But you can see we're already getting a huge number of rays just after one bounce. So I'm firing tons of rays, but none of the light is reaching the eye, essentially. And in fact, most of the light that one shines from a light source does not reach the eye. The eye is just a tiny point in all of the space around, so it's very hard. It's very expensive to try and simulate this way. So ray tracing works backwards. So we start from the camera, we shoot out a ray, and then that ray can hit the sphere, and then we compute a reflection angle. It can bounce, hit the sphere again, and keep bouncing, and so on. And then from those rays, we only have a few rays, but essentially we're computing all the light in the room, but only the part of the light that gets to the eye, because with ray tracing, it relies on the time reversible nature of the light, that you can run the light forwards or backwards and you get the same result. It's symmetrical. So we can actually fire light from the eye instead of firing light from the point source, in a sense. Now that we've done that, what does our animation look like inside this perfectly reflective sphere with one light source and moving the camera? It's actually kind of interesting. Now it's very symmetrical because the sphere is very symmetrical, and the only asymmetry comes from the fact that our light source is placed slightly to one side of our camera, so we get a slight distribution of shading sideways. It's not just totally uniform. But another interesting thing is that this motion, it's not simply a pullback. We actually have a tunnel-like effect created here. So let's try another little change. A very simple thing, just make it an ellipse shape. So now we're moving through, I just non-proportionately scaled it. Still very simple animation. Now, the non-proportional scaling means that it's no longer fully symmetrical. So we now have some asymmetries introduced. And you get a lot of complexity, a lot of interest, basically, with still an extremely simple setup. Now this is, believe it or not, this is one sphere with another sphere inside it. So I've got one bluish sphere. It's reflecting bluish. It's got a blue specular color, just very slightly blue. It's almost totally reflective. And then the main sphere, the large one that we're inside, has a slightly red specular color. And so that gives us, all this is created just from that very, very simple setup. Here's another example of a sphere that's inside a tetrahedron. In this case, I actually, when you create a tetrahedron in Maya, the surfaces are flat, but actually the shading is round like a sphere. It doesn't actually flatten the normals for you, so you got to go in and do that manually. So that initially confused me, but it made for an interesting picture. So I like the it's sort of like the flat surface of the tetrahedron trying to become a sphere in a sense, and it creates for some interesting asymmetries in the image. Okay, now another setup I have here is three spheres in a tetrahedral arrangement inside a reflective tetrahedron, and then the spheres are totally reflective themselves, but the tetrahedron, each face of it is just a slightly different tint, so that when a ray bounces on it, it picks up a little bit of that color, right? And that can make for interesting effects. The render of that setup looks like this. Now to get the brilliant colors, it would tend to get darker where it reflects a lot, and so to avoid that, you can actually make the specular color, you can make some of the colors brighter than white. So in that case, it's not totally realistic. Whenever the ray bounces, it actually gets a little brighter. Say it might go a little more red, but it might get darker and green. So you can play with those kinds of things just by playing with the specular colors for the reflectivity. And you have to also make sure you've got a nice high ray depth and stuff settings for these to get good effects with them. This image, I believe, is 8 spheres, each placed at the corner of a cube, basically, and then put inside a cube. And everything is totally reflective. And then I have 3 cylinders put in the middle of that, and that's the entire setup. And then just ray trace it with a high level of depth, put a little bump map, and this is what you get. You get a lot of complexity, although the detail in the reflections does tend to get very, very complex and tangled as you get in. Recently I saw a fly-through of hyperbolic dodecahedral space. This Poincaré hyperbolic space is actually, some think, might reflect the way the universe is constructed, and so it's become a little bit more interesting lately. And in the fly-through, I thought, well, gee, that looks like if you just put mirrors on the faces of a dodecahedron and move the camera inside. So I thought I'd give it a shot and see what happens. So here's a simple setup. I just create, we have the Platonic primitives and stuff that you can create off the defaults menu, and then assign, to give it an outline, you can use Maya Toon, which will create outlines, and you can convert that to poly. And then for the spheres at the corner, just duplicate spheres, and you can do point snap to snap them to the vertices. It's nice and quick. Inside I also have an icosahedron, which is the complement of the dodecahedron, where you have a vertex at the center of each face of the dodecahedron. To animate this, the simplest way I think of was just rotate the dodecahedron. So you just rotate it. You could move the camera. In this case, I also added an up and down motion of the camera, and I rotate 180 degrees, and then the camera comes back to its resting spot at the end of it. So at the end of that, everything is the same, so you get a looping animation of kind of flying through this space. Now, I was kind of struck in that looking at this, it's not hyperbolic space because the mirrors are flat, really, and so the perspective in them really has to be sort of a standard flat kind of shape of space. But the thing that struck me is that looking at it, it looks like all the connections are properly formed in the cages here, and it looks like you have a repeating lattice of dodecahedrons, and that seemed to me to be surprising because I know that you cannot tile 3D space with dodecahedrons. So I'm wondering, not in flat space. So I found that was quite surprising. So I tried making the lines a little thinner, and then finally I realized why I was being so confused. If we stop this animation, you can see quite clearly that lines here do not line up. So as with the reflection, right, it's not really creating a coherent space. Basically, it's tearing it apart, and there are little hidden bits of space that are gaps where these lines are, essentially. So, but if the lines are thick enough, it's a fairly good illusion, and you don't notice the discontinuity of the connections as much. So here's another animation flying through that space. In this case, just having the camera twist. So here, again, you can see the space looks good. If you look carefully, you can see some places where it doesn't seem to quite line up, but it's a pretty convincing illusion. Now there's a little pop there, and I get back to the repeat point where it jumps back to the beginning. I don't think I had the cameras placed quite right, and there are some slight differences due to reflections and stuff when you get out one end and then when you go back into the other end. But it's a pretty interesting illusion. Now to get the fog in this, I use Maya fluids. The fluids are pretty good for integrating fog volumes, and you have to turn on the visibility of the fluid in reflections so that you can see the fog increasing through all the reflections. Now here I have the in order to try and create something closer to the hyperbolic dodecahedral space, I've taken some spheres and positioned them at the vertices of an icosahedron, and then just scale them up, and then inside they'll form a dodecahedron where they intersect. In this case, though, it's a dodecahedron with curved walls, and you scale the spheres just to the point where when they intersect it creates a right angle. So now we have right angles at all the joints for the dodecahedron. Now, admittedly, to get the proper hyperbolic space, I don't think spheres are correct. You'd probably have to use a different curvature there. But it still works. Now, to get the lines between the spheres, you might be wondering that. These are created, again, with Maya Toon, but just use the intersection lines on them, and you can create lines where meshes intersect. Now in this animation, to me it's not quite as interesting in some ways as the kind of fake linear space of the flat animation, but with the curvature, now we are getting at the joints here. You note that they are all square, so we have the corners as if on a cube lattice. They're all at right angles, the joins, although it's curved and bent because the space itself is warped. Now there are some slight differences to true hyperbolic space in that due to the nature of the reflection of the mirrors at a sharp angle is just slightly different, but it gives you an approximation, and it's really easy to set up. Now here's back the flat space again, and really the idea that this could be tiling dodecahedrons is a bit of fool's gold, but it was a fun illusion. An interesting thing, fool's gold actually can assume a dodecahedron shape. So with fool's gold, yet even though that type of crystal structure is impossible, you cannot have a regular dodecahedral structure, you could be fooled into thinking that there is such a structure with fool's gold. And actually, there's this substance, they call it a pyrite, you know, fool's gold is pyrite, pyritohedron, named after fool's gold. And this shape is kind of an interesting primitive in that it has multiple positions. So it's not just a single primitive, but a class of primitives. And here I'm showing you the range of shapes in it. So, and in fact, fool's gold can form, I believe, most of these shapes because of the way it can cleave. So, and you'll notice that right halfway in the middle of these shapes, you get the, not quite there, but you get the dodecahedron, and the pentagonal dodecahedron. If you keep going, you get the rhombic dodecahedron, which actually, I believe, can tile space. Way, though, it works with the fool's gold is it kind of cleaves like this. So you actually have a cubic structure, which is more the native kind of crystal structure of the fool's gold, but it can cleave in these shapes that create different types of polyhedra. I'd like to draw your attention to a recent post I put up on the Autodesk area site on my Duncan's Corner called Mandelbrot Madness. And in this I post a lot of images and explanations of some Mandelbrot sets that I did, along with Maya scene files that you can download. So there's lots of good information, and it will cover a lot of the stuff that I'm going to go into right now. Yeah, there's a scene file you can download, and this is called Mandelbrot Demo. And in this, there's a Mandelbrot generator that, and I'm just using the camera moving here with changing my dolly and view, and the texture regenerates of this Mandelbrot texture. But this is all done with Mel, so there's no actual C code involved. It's just a Mel script. So if we bring up the expression editor, and we can look at that expression, there's a couple of expressions. One to position a plane based on the view, that's expression 2. And then the other one, expression 1, generates the actual Mandelbrot set. Now what it does is it creates the set using a sampler info and then plugging into texture coordinates of a ramp texture. So the Mandelbrot drives the texture. Now we can change a few of the bits of math in here just to make this a little bit more interesting Mandelbrot set than the kind of default. This will use like a minimum z distance through our iteration loop. Now the Mandelbrot set is fascinating because the actual equations in it are incredibly simple, and yet they yield so much complexity and so much diversity of complexity. Now this min z has some interesting look to it. One of the things I like is that it's continuous as opposed to the more discrete Mandelbrot set, so you get nice shading effects. Another thing about this is because of the shape, you get almost 3D shapes with this, even though it's still just a simple 2D image render. Here's another example of something that sort of looks a little 3D. There's a little function where it took an absolute value of a distance, and again you can download all the files that I'm showing here are on the website, and so you can open up the expression, you can see the math being used for all these images. This one uses what are called pickover stock, named by the fellow Pickover who came up with the technique. Basically, you take the distance to the axis within each iteration. And again, that yields internal structure that you can see that's quite interesting. Here's another example of that technique. And now one can also apply this pickover stock technique to a Julia set. A Julia set is Mandelbrot sets are composed of Julia sets, basically. Mandelbrot set contains all possible Julia sets. Julia sets are a little simpler, but they're also very nice when used with these kind of techniques. I found this one really created interesting ropey effects. This one has a almost Dali-esque quality to it, and again, it looks 3D the way things seem to twist over each other. Another technique is to look at the distance to a circle within the coordinate space within each iteration. So you can, by checking that distance, essentially you get a lot of other interesting detail, and this also has kind of a smoothing function. This one I particularly liked. It's similar to that. It's sort of like this. It's like a little guy with a bum tooting pretty colors. Okay, you can also do bump mapping, and I actually found bump mapping rather than you could use Maya bump mapping, but I found that I got much smoother results just by implementing it directly within the function, and you can look at that in the math for these as well. This is an example. I'm running a Maya particle system, and I've got a particle expression that is evaluating a little bit of Mandelbrot code, and that creates what's called the Buddhabrot version of the Mandelbrot set. So that file is also on the blog post, and you can play with that. Another thing I thought was kind of interesting to try, and I haven't really quite seen this, is I've got a little script that takes the escape paths during each iteration, and it turns them into Maya curves. So then, you can see what the escape paths are for different points. So this one, the point starts there and it eventually kind of spirals inward. Some points kind of end up going off to out to infinity, and other ones in the set kind of collapse and the radius gets small. And then some just have they kind of keep orbiting around the same radius. So it reminds me a lot of like stuff you might get in a particle accelerator with various particles and in a magnetic field being spun around. This was come to known as the Mandelbulb, and I rendered this with Maya fluids. It's 3D, which makes it interesting. The math, in order to do this, they came up with a polar form of the Mandelbrot set math that lets you increase the power function easily in it instead of using just a power 2, and that lets you, the higher powers tend to work better for the 3D. I'm not entirely convinced that one can say that it's truly like the 3D form of the Mandelbrot set, because Mandelbrot set doesn't really map well onto 3 dimensions, but this is a mapping that is quite pleasing to the eye and has a lot of interesting effects. Now with the fluid shading, I could do lots of interesting things too, using all the ramps and stuff and different shading techniques available on the fluid. Unfortunately, you can't download or create these yourself because I'd had to do my own build of Maya, and I implemented this basically as a custom internal texture on the Maya fluid node. But there are lots of great things out there that you can explore these surfaces with, and I give a few links on my blog post. This is a Julia set, so a 3D Julia set, and then I also have the Pickford stalks in it, which gives this interesting kind of hairiness to it. Another 3D Julia set that I thought was kind of interesting, and again you can have fun with the shading side to make it more appealing. Now, the polar form that was used in the Mandelbulb I thought was interesting. Why not just use that in the 2D? And that lets us have more lobes on it. A typical Mandelbrot set has just one lobe. And so you can, this one has 5, and you can do them with any number. As you get into higher lobe counts, it's not as interesting. This is a 3-lobe one, kind of a close-up of part of it, and you can, and there's also using that min-z technique, and I found you could get pretty interesting images with that. This is one sort of a floral technique with this one. This is a 3-part symmetry. Now this is it's called the Mandelbox, another thing similar to the Mandelbulb in the way you render it, and although it's a fairly different function than the Mandelbrot set. And the look is also quite different too, of course. It's very geometric. But that's one of the appeals of it for me, is it looks like something that humans would create or some alien civilization might come up with. And it just has amazing detail in it. This one kind of reminds me a bit of something by Gaudi that he might have designed, you know, but you get it just with this very simple math. It uses kind of a folding sort of algorithm. Now, I tried applying it to the Mandelbrot set. So I tried mixing the Mandelbrot set and the Mandelbox, and got something that was sort of interesting, although I don't think it would look very good in 3D, but I'm showing you the 3D version here because when I did a cutaway, I kind of saw this shape and I thought, that's interesting. So I took that out and made it a 2D function, and again, you can download all the 2D stuff. So here's a 2D version of that, and you can get these really interesting lacy shapes. It's using the Mandelbrot set, kind of the Mandelbrot set folded on itself. Here's an animation, and this is animating the Mandelbox parameters on a Mandelbrot set. And so it's fun too because you have a couple of parameters that you can change and get different effects.